It's so great to see everybody here. You just can't imagine after months of envisioning this, and then you're all here. It's great. I'm Kathy Lieb. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I split my time between doing clinical supervision here just around the corner at Family Service Agency, and I have a private practice in Midtown, Sacramento. Earlier, George and Jean provided us with some guidelines for how to work with political issues within the clinical hour. It's a pretty complex task. I would like to talk more broadly about how the larger social, economic, and political climate impacts therapy, and how our work in psychotherapy impacts the larger environment. Once the experiment in the petri dish of therapy begins, material from the larger environment will gradually have its effect on what takes shape in the therapeutic exchange. Unlike the controlled laboratory experiment, the environment surrounding psychotherapy is full of contaminants from society that affect clinician and client alike. When it comes to the intersection of our clinical work and the larger cultural milieu, there is no such thing as operating in a zone of complete neutrality, especially in these times of war, terrorism, and global communication. As mental health professionals, we really only have two choices. We will either operate ignorant of how our own opinions and values might subtly influence our work, or we will consciously use our knowledge and our feelings about the world we live in to promote mental health. We either collude with the destructive forces in the world about us, often by our silence, or we challenge them. Furthermore, I believe that we have an obligation as healing professionals to be politically active, both in the clinical hour when appropriate and out. It is ethically and morally right, but more pragmatically, it's impossible to avoid. Now you might be thinking, that's pretty black and white thinking. And so at the risk of sounding like a flip-flopper, let me attempt to nuance this complex issue with a case example. A parent called me, desperate to get her 16-year-old in for treatment. He was in trouble at school, and they had confirmed that he'd been dabbling in substance abuse. We scheduled an appointment, but mom cancels. We scheduled another appointment, canceled again, too many scheduling conflicts. I don't hear from them for several weeks, but then I get another call, this time from the dad. But now the concern is focused on the 14-year-old. I finally meet with the parents, and the story that unfolds is of a family with two parents, 3 adolescents, and lots of conflict between mom and dad, among the siblings, and all 5 family members. I could give you more history about the family dynamics, but there was something in this case that was a major impediment to making any lasting change in this family. A major obstacle to treatment is often the all-American family. Both parents working full-time at very demanding jobs and pursuing advanced degrees in night school. A big house full of televisions, cell phones, nice cars, and yes, one of the cars is a gas-guzzling SUV. As a practitioner and promoter of mental health, what am I going to do? Help them cope with this anxiety-ridden, overscheduled, compulsively consuming lifestyle? Their previous therapy had helped them do just that, cope a little better. This same pattern was repeating with me. After a few sessions of working on communication, there was less conflict. But the fundamental issue of how they were following the American dream, or nightmare, depending on how you look at it, was very difficult to address. In street vernacular, I was aware that what I was doing was cooling the mark by helping them cope with societal forces that were not only destructive to their family, but multiplied by millions of American families, has a serious negative impact on the planet in the form of environmental degradation and the growing threat of wars over dwindling resources. Cooling the mark refers to a scam, usually criminal. Those of you that work in drug treatment probably have heard this from your clients. And the way the scam works is the con man targets the mark, the unsuspecting victim, and steals something from them or exploits them in some way. And then shortly after, her partner follows up behind him, posing as a good Samaritan, distracting the victim from calling the police. That's cooling the mark. I don't think it's possible to avoid this kind of collusion, soothing and distracting the mark. It's impossible to not participate in some way ourselves in a cultural, economic, and political systems in which we live. Our collusion may be inevitable, but I don't think it's criminal, at least not usually. We have no intent to harm or exploit others. What we want to do is help. We can at least cool the mark mindfully, looking for opportunities to challenge when it is therapeutically appropriate. And we can be informed and active outside the clinical hour, working for changes in the larger environment that promote both individual and societal mental health. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about money, often a taboo subject both in and out of the clinical hour. For many years, the United States has had the highest rates of economic inequality in the advanced industrial world. That is, a large disparity between the richest few and everybody else. We also have the highest rates of poverty, the highest workloads for the average worker, and some of the weakest benefits and social support systems of all the developed nations. Recent U.S. Census figures indicate that the number of people without health insurance continues to rise, as does unemployment. This is the economic climate within which we practice. Now, it may not be very popular to say, and I know many of you here probably work for agencies and managed care, but the truth is the most prestigious level of practice in the mental health profession, to which many of us aspire, including myself, is private practice, fee-for-service with as little involvement with the hassles of insurance companies as possible. We're talking about $70 to $120 an hour or more. I won't ask for a show of hands here. The hard truth is that at these rates, we're servicing a very elite group of folks. Now, I know the arguments that say we're worth it, and actually I agree with that. When psychotherapy is done well, it's very hard work, and it takes a lifetime of skill and training to do it well. But the fact still remains, what about the vast majority of the population that cannot afford our services, including probably some of you in the room right now? I won't tell you the story how much I bargained down for when I got some personal therapy a couple years ago. Couldn't afford the going rate. As practitioners, once we reach the level of private practice, we cut deals with our social consciences. Some of us have decided that we did our time working for managed care and the nonprofits, overworked and underpaid. Some of us give back by providing some reduced fee and pro bono work. Others provide consultation, supervision, and moral support for those of you who are in training or have chosen to continue to work with the poor. Then there is the rationalization, and I think it has some merit, that if we psychotherapists, through our work, humanize those who control the largest share of the country's power and wealth, we are providing a service for the masses. Sort of a trickle-down theory of psychotherapy. In any case, we deal with economic issues every day in terms of who gets treatment and who doesn't. We help clients deal with job loss, lack of affordable housing, and the limitations imposed on treatment by insurance companies. We contend with the powerful influence of the pop the pill, have a beautiful life pharmaceutical industry. None of us can avoid the harsh reality that health care and mental health care in particular is rationed in this country according to how much someone can pay or how good of a job you have so that you have some insurance. The economics of mental health is an issue, both in and out of the clinical hour. Now, some would say that psychotherapists as activists is an oxymoron. The prevailing school of thought, and what I think is the easy way out, is to stay out of the intersection of politics and psychotherapy. Just don't go there, take a detour. I don't know how we can avoid this intersection if we're working to provide lasting change, or how we can help people develop meaning in their lives without it. In my view, it is extremely important to make politics a safe place and a part of the clinical discourse. I have a client who occasionally says, "Can you believe what that nitwit in the White House has done now?" Now, sometimes these comments are just chit-chat that starts the session and we move on to other material. Other times, his nitwit comments have provided direct links to some very productive therapeutic work. For example, when the Abu Ghraib prison abuse story hit the news. In this case, current events led to a productive conversation about both being a bully and being the victim of a bully. The shadow, as Elizabeth talked about, was brought conscious. One of my client's treatment goals is to understand his anger and aggression. We've also talked about his anxiety leading up to this election. He lives on a fixed disability income and he's worried about cuts in Social Security benefits. Lots of our clients out there have lots of feelings about this election. Have we provided a safe place for them to talk about those feelings in therapy? If we try to avoid political topics or cleverly deflect and possibly dismiss them with, "Oh, I see you have some feelings about that," we don't create a zone within which clients can safely discuss their political views, their worries, and their hatreds. This material will either be censored or used unconsciously to try and provoke us. We're trained to create a safe zone for the interpersonal and intrapsychic hot topics like sexual abuse, addictions, compulsions, and infidelities. But clients also need our support in exploring culture, religion, economics, and politics. If we don't provide this safe zone, whether we're working with a fundamentalist Christian or a Greenpeacer, we will miss therapeutic opportunities, as well as operate without important information about our clients. I recently saw a couple who expressed concern about their 19-year-old son. Dad found a letter to his son from the draft board on the floor, and an argument ensued. From the parents' point of view, this was just one more example of their son being irresponsible. A previously goal-directed, respectful child was uncharacteristically angry. He dropped out of his first semester of college and was procrastinating about getting a job. The parents were worried about his mood swings, and I got the predictable questions about what I thought about a referral for medications. Now, I'm not against medications. They are extremely helpful to many people. But I am concerned about the temptation they create for a quick fix. I suggested instead that we start with looking a little deeper into this young man's problems and asked a few questions. Yes, they have concerns that he may have a substance abuse problem. We talked about how they might approach this with their son and the possibility of referrals. Now, that could have been the end of the topic, but I decided to go back and ask them about the letter from the draft board. Do they think that this could have had something to do with their son's irritability that day? Mom thought, well, maybe he had thought about joining the military in the past. Dad chimes in that the military could provide him the structure that he needs. I've heard that before. And off they went on to another topic. When I found an opening, I redirected them back to the topic of the draft board letter, wondering how their son might be feeling about the future. I commented that, it's different thinking about joining the military to get help with education or to get structure in your life than when there's a war going on. Do you think your son's worried about the war and his future in general? This time, they slowed down at the intersection and began to pour out not only what their son might be anxious about, but what they were worried about. They wondered, will our children ever be able to move out, afford an apartment, let alone a house of their own? They commented on how hard it is to find jobs these days, especially good ones that pay decently. Both of their sons had talked about the military option, and they hadn't opposed it in the past. But now they were more aware of the risk of them getting killed or them having the experience of killing others. What about the toxins released in the war? That affects American troops as well as the enemy. After much discussion, consensus was reached that these are difficult times for young people. Hopefully, our conversation opened up the door to more empathy and deeper communication to help their son. I can't tell you what happened because that just happened this week. It was so poignant that I wanted to work it in. And I'd like to say at this point that one of the major reasons why I had the courage to redirect and go back to the issue of the draft letter, of the letter from the draft board, was the support that I get from attending the Therapists for Social Responsibility meetings and working on this conference. So here we are at the intersection of the political and the psychological. Unfortunately, history is full of examples of mental health professionals cooling the mark and collaborating with forces opposed to social, economic, and environmental health. We can start with Freud and his retreat from challenging the pervasive and destructive forces of Victorian patriarchy, specifically his cover-up of the high incidence of sexual abuse reported to him by his female clients. More recently, we've read about the work of psychological researchers who worked with the Defense Department to develop techniques for stressing, just short of torturing, detainees into giving up information to interrogators. Techniques that ran amok at the prison. The New England Journal of Medicine recently published an article describing the results of the first study ever to track the psychological effects of a U.S. war while the war is still going on. And the conclusion? They found 1 in 7 veterans already experiencing signs of PTSD. Their recommendation? Intervene early to support the troops when they first come home to reduce the occurrence of PTSD. Now this is good. We've got to get better at intervening early to assist trauma victims, whether it be from war, child abuse, or violent crime. But how about being really proactive? Don't go to war in the first place. Let's fully fund child abuse prevention programs, support prison reform, deal with the underlying economic and social issues that put stress on families and makes it more likely that violence will occur. Let's not reenact the don't talk rule, often practiced in families struggling to cope with a substance abusing member. We must ask questions. We must make it safe for our clients to ask questions of themselves and of us. Neither of the candidates for president nor the news media is talking much about how many Iraqis and Afghanis have been maimed and killed in this war. Our profession is rooted in humanistic values and the assumptions that all human beings are capable of self-actualization, ethical behavior, and deserve a life with dignity. We, as psychotherapists, continue to grapple with the historic controversy between Freud and Jung. Should psychotherapists commit themselves to a medical or moral perspective on psychotherapy. Although Freud was never totally comfortable with the medicalization of mental disorders, he promoted the view that mental illnesses were organic disorders, predicting that psychoanalysis would someday be replaced by chemical substances, and I quote, which would create undreamt of possibilities for therapy. And I might add, pharmaceutical industry. Carl Jung was also ambivalent about whether psychoanalysis was a medical or spiritual enterprise. On the whole, however, he was more anti-medical and pro-spiritual. Thomas Szasz draws a very interesting conclusion from this battle of the masters. He concludes that Freud, more ambitious than Jung, appraised the social economic climate of his time. Science, not religion, was the great legitimizer, and therefore he insisted on psychotherapy as a science to promote it. Jung, on the other hand, rejected this opportunistic hitching of psychotherapy to science. In 1932, he wrote, "In this matter of spiritual needs, both the doctor and the patient deceive themselves. Although the theories of Freud and Adler come much clearer to getting at the bottom of the neuroses than does any earlier approach to the question from the side of medicine, they still fail. In a word, they do not give meaning enough to life, and it is only in meaning that we are set free." At this juncture in the history of our profession, I think it's pretty clear that this is not an either-or proposition. Psychotherapy is both a medical and a spiritual enterprise. Creating space to make politics part of the therapeutic discourse provides meaning in our work and in our lives, and those of our clients. By grasping the big picture, we connect to the world community. Perhaps our most important job at this time is to hold the hope. Just like we do with suicidal clients who, because of their depression and hopelessness, can't even imagine things getting better, we are poised to make a difference. We, as psychotherapists, are called to hold the hope for a just and peaceful tomorrow.